Let's look at the discriminant of a quadratic. In the quadratic formula, the discriminant is b squared minus 4ac, which determines how many roots a quadratic has. So if b squared minus 4ac is greater than 0, then this implies that the quadratic has two distinct roots. So for its graph, we would see that the quadratic crosses the horizontal axis at two different points. And depending on the coefficient of the squared term, if it's positive, we would have a U-shape quadratic. If it's negative, we would have an N-shape quadratic. If b squared minus 4ac is equal to 0, then this implies that the quadratic has one repeated root. In other words, the graph would indicate that the quadratic touches the horizontal axis at one point only, and that is the repeated root that we have. If b squared minus 4ac is less than 0, this implies that the quadratic has no real roots. And so the graph of the quadratic would not cross the horizontal axis at any point. Let's look at some examples. So the first example says, how many roots does y equals 3x squared minus 5x plus 3 have? So in this case, if we want to determine the number of roots that this quadratic has, we can use the discriminant to work this out quickly. So we should first write down the coefficients of the terms within the quadratic. So in this case, a equals to 3 because it's the coefficient of the squared term, b equals to minus 5 because it's the coefficient of the term that has a single x, and c equals to 3 because it's the number on its own. And so working out the discriminant, we have b squared minus 4ac, which in this case is equal to minus 5 all squared minus 4 times a, which is 3, times c, which is 3. We now simplify this. We have minus 5 all squared, which is 25, and then we're subtracting 4 times 3, which is 12, and then 12 times 3, which is 36. So 25 minus 36 gives us minus 11. Since the discriminant here is minus 11, which is negative or less than 0, then this implies that the quadratic has no real roots, because if b squared minus 4ac is less than 0, then the implication is that the quadratic has no real roots. And so we say that the number of roots is 0. Since this quadratic has 0 roots, then the graph of the quadratic would not cross the horizontal axis at any point. And so it would look similar to one of these graphs. In this case, the coefficient of the squared term is positive, which is 3, so it would be a U-shaped graph that doesn't cross the horizontal axis. Let's look at the second example, which says, how many solutions does minus 10x squared plus 7x plus a quarter equal to 0 have? So in this case, we have a quadratic that equals to 0, so we can use the discriminant to identify how many roots, or solutions in this case, the quadratic has. So using b squared minus 4ac, first we should think about the coefficients of the terms here. So a equals to minus 10 because it's the coefficient of the squared term, b equals to 7 because it's the coefficient of the x term, and c equals to a quarter because it's the number on its own. So working out the discriminant, b squared minus 4ac, in this case it equals to 7 all squared minus 4 times a, which in this case is minus 10, times c, which in this case is a quarter. If we simplify this, we then get 7 squared, which is 49, and now we're subtracting 4 times minus 10, which is minus 40, and minus 40 times a quarter, which is minus 20. So we're subtracting minus 20 altogether. Now we have 49 minus minus 20, which becomes 49 plus 20, and so if we add these two numbers together, we get 69. Since the discriminant here is greater than 0, so in this case it's 69, then this implies that the quadratic equation above has two distinct solutions. In other words, if we were sketching the quadratic y equals minus 10x squared plus 7x plus a quarter, then the quadratic would go through the horizontal axis at two distinct points. Last example says, what is the discriminant of y equals x squared plus 6x plus 9? So first we should label the coefficients. A is equal to 1 because it's the coefficient of the squared term, b is equal to 6 because it's the coefficient of the x term, and c is equal to 9 because it's the number on its own. So working out the discriminant, b squared minus 4ac, we have in this case that b is equal to 6, so we have 6 all squared minus 4 times a, which is equal to 1, times c, which is equal to 9. Now simplify this, we have 6 squared, which is 36, minus 4 times 1, which is 4, 4 times 9, which is 36. So 36 minus 36 is equal to 0. And so in this case, the discriminant of y equals x squared plus 6x plus 9 is equal to 0. In terms of the graph of this quadratic, then has one repeated root because the discriminant equals to 0, and so the quadratic would touch the horizontal axis at one point.